Pay a rent of $1,800 every month and stay with me, or just go away and don't call me again. My daughter said when I asked if I could stay with her for some weeks when I lost my house. So I left and didn't stay with her because I couldn't afford what she was demanding. 1 month later, I received an emergency call from her. She needed my help. Would you take a wild guess before you continue the story? What do you think I'd do to her? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to support us. It will be great to know in the comments section where you are listening from. Now let me tell you everything that happened. I never thought I'd be 56 years old, sitting in my truck with a half-warm cup of gas station coffee and no place to go. 6 months earlier, I had a job, a mortgage, and a quiet pride in the life I'd built. I wasn't rich, not even close, but I paid my bills on time, mowed my own lawn every Saturday, and put dinner on the table without ever asking anyone for help. I was the kind of man who thought needing help meant you'd failed somewhere along the way. And when I lost my job, I tried to hold it together, blew through my savings faster than I expected, skipped meals to stretch what little I had, sold off old tools and furniture until all I had left was a couple boxes and the clothes in my truck. I didn't cry when the bank took the house. I didn't even cry when I handed over the keys. But the day I called my daughter and asked if I could stay with her for a few weeks, that broke something in me. I hadn't spoken to Natalie in a couple of months. Not because there was any tension, I just didn't want her worrying. She had her own life now, busy with work and some startup business I barely understood. But I figured if there was ever a time I could lean on her just a little, this was it. I rehearsed my words in the truck before I dialed. Told myself to keep it light, calm. I even smiled when she picked up. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "I was wondering if I could crash at your place for a bit, just until I get back on my feet." There was silence on the other end, just a pause, short but sharp. And then her voice, flat and too businesslike. "You can stay if you pay rent, $1,800 a month. Otherwise, I think it's better if you figure something else out." I laughed, thinking maybe she was joking. But she didn't laugh back. "I'm serious, Dad. I can't just take on extra people for free. I have bills. I have a system." I didn't yell, didn't beg. I just hung up after thanking her quietly. Then I stared at the steering wheel for a long time, wondering how the same girl who used to beg me to check under her bed for monsters had become someone who saw me as a line item in a budget. I drove away from her apartment that day without ever pulling into the lot. There was something humiliating about the idea of knocking on her door with my duffel bag in hand, knowing she didn't want me there unless I was paying to be. I wasn't mad in the way people usually mean when they say that word. I was emptied, hollow, like all the years I spent working overtime so she could go to dance classes, or the way I skipped buying myself a winter coat so she could have a new backpack, had just evaporated into nothing. I knew I hadn't been a perfect father. I'd been tired. I'd snapped at her a few times. But love? I never withheld that. Not once. So it floored me that when I was at my lowest, she couldn't even offer me a damn couch. Just rent, like I was a stranger on Craigslist. I spent the next few nights sleeping in my truck on a quiet street near a park I used to take her to when she was little. The irony didn't escape me. I'd sat on those benches watching her feed ducks and ride the swing set, never imagining there'd be a day I'd be parked out front, too ashamed to knock on her door. I cleaned up at gas stations, brushed my teeth in the sink with my shoulders hunched so no one would look too closely. I ate cheap microwave burritos and granola bars, drinking more water than I needed just to feel full. I kept applying for jobs, anything really, but no one wanted a man my age with nothing but a maintenance background and reliable transportation that now doubled as his bedroom. I tried not to resent her. I told myself people change, grow apart, prioritize differently. But at night, when I laid back in that cramped seat, all I could hear was her voice, clear as a bell, "Pay rent or don't call me again." The worst part was, I still loved her. That feeling didn't go away. Even in my lowest moments, when I should have been angry, when I should have been cursing her name, all I could remember were the good years. Her first car, the way she cried when I surprised her with it. The letter she wrote me on Father's Day when she was 12, calling me her hero. I held on to those memories like a fool, like a man sitting in a burning house clutching family photos instead of running for his life. It wasn't just about shelter. It was about what her rejection symbolized, that maybe I'd failed in some deeper way I couldn't fix. Eventually, a former coworker, Dave, heard I was down bad and offered me a place to crash for a few nights. Just a couch, but it felt like a palace compared to the truck. He even brought me a hot plate of spaghetti on the first night and said nothing when he saw the tears welling up in my eyes. "You looked out for me once," he said, shrugging. "This ain't charity. It's just your turn." I wanted to believe that, but Natalie's words still echoed in my head. I couldn't shake the idea that somewhere along the line, I became less than a father to her, just a bill she didn't want to pay. I didn't keep count of the nights I slept in my truck, but I remember every bruise in my lower back from the way the seat never quite reclined flat. Some mornings, I'd wake up so stiff I couldn't tell if the ache was from the position or from the pressure sitting like wet cement in my chest. There's a special kind of silence at 3 in the morning when you're parked behind a gas station, windows cracked just enough to let in the night air without making yourself too visible. I used to think of silence as peace, something earned. But in that season of my life, silence felt more like erasure, like the world had moved on without me, and I was just some forgotten relic taking up space in the margins. Nobody looked twice at me anymore. Not the cashier at the corner store. Not the joggers in the park where I used the public restroom. When you fall hard enough, you stop being seen. You become background noise in a world that doesn't slow down for broken men. What gutted me most during those weeks wasn't the hunger or the shame. It was the loneliness. When Natalie was little, she'd call me at work just to hear my voice. She used to say it calmed her, that it made her feel safe. I'd step out of meetings or leave my lunch unfinished just to tell her I'd be home soon, that everything was okay. Now, I was the one staring at my phone in the dark, hoping for a text that never came. I didn't want money. I didn't want rescue. I just wanted to feel like I still mattered. But the silence between us had grown into something thick and cold, and I didn't have the strength or the pride to break it again. I kept thinking about how easily she dismissed me, how her voice didn't even waver when she gave me that number. $1,800. Not even a couch for a few weeks. I tried to justify it, tell myself maybe she was scared, maybe she didn't know how to help. But that voice inside me, the one I'd ignored for far too long, kept whispering that no child who truly loved their parent would let them sink like this. Around week 3, I finally got a bite on one of the job applications I'd sent out to every corner of the city. It was a temporary janitorial gig at a shipping warehouse on the edge of town. Low pay, long hours, but I showed up early, shirt tucked in, and ready to prove I wasn't finished yet. The manager barely looked at my resume, but liked that I didn't flinch at the graveyard shift. That night, I cleaned bathrooms, swept loading docks, and emptied trash cans with the kind of gratitude only a man with nothing left can feel. The pay wouldn't cover a studio apartment, but it was enough to eat properly and stop worrying about whether my gas tank would hit empty before payday. That small thread of stability was enough to help me start clawing back from the edge. It reminded me that I wasn't helpless, even if I'd been humiliated. On my third night at the warehouse, I ran into Dave again, an old co-worker from my days doing building maintenance for the school district. He looked surprised to see me, asked if I was doing all right, which was code for, "Why the hell are you cleaning urinals at midnight?" I didn't lie, but I didn't tell him everything either. Just said things had been rough. He nodded, didn't pry. That was Dave. Later that week, he called and said he had a pull-out couch in his basement if I needed a place to crash for a while. "It ain't fancy," he said, "but it's clean and the water's hot." I hesitated for a beat, then accepted, not out of desperation, but because he offered it with dignity. Not as a transaction, not as a favor I'd have to repay with groveling. Just one man helping another stay afloat. That basement became a sanctuary. The mattress was lumpy, but it didn't recline at a 70-degree angle, and that alone made it feel like luxury. I'd wake up to the smell of Dave's ancient coffee maker sputtering in the kitchen upstairs, and once or twice, he'd leave a plate of toast on the table with a post-it that read, "Fuel up." We didn't talk much, just enough to share space without crowding each other. I was grateful for the quiet kindness, for the way he never asked about Natalie or what landed me on that couch. He gave me space to lick my wounds without poking at them. And in that space, I started to remember what it felt like to breathe without shame. I spent my evenings after work applying for better jobs, watching old movies on my cracked tablet, and journaling, something I hadn't done in decades. Writing became a kind of therapy. I poured everything into those pages, my fears, my regrets, my anger, my memories of raising Natalie. I wrote about her first dance recital, how she froze on stage until she saw me in the audience and smiled. I wrote about the time she got her acceptance letter to college and cried into my shoulder, saying she was scared to leave. And I wrote about that day on the phone, how her voice had gone cold, like I was just another inconvenience to be managed. In those pages, I was brutally honest with myself. I didn't paint myself as a perfect father, but I did acknowledge the ways I had shown up for her, time and time again, without keeping score. That's what love is supposed to be. But apparently, not everyone plays by the same rules. One night, I sat on that couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering if Natalie ever thought about me. Wondered if she ever passed a homeless man and felt a flicker of guilt, knowing her own father had been a breath away from that same fate. I doubted it. She lived in a curated world of planners and productivity apps, where everything had a price tag, even love. I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. That family came first. But those beliefs were forged in a different time, a different kind of loyalty. These days, it seemed like people treated family as optional, something you indulge when it's convenient, not when it costs you comfort. And I had become inconvenient. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of gray, unremarkable day that slides by unnoticed until something shatters the quiet. I had just finished mopping the warehouse floors after a 10-hour shift and was sipping burnt coffee from the vending machine when my phone started vibrating. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. I almost didn't answer. Most of the time, unknown numbers meant scam calls or bill collectors still chasing ghosts. But something in me, maybe instinct, maybe that old ache I never fully shook, made me press the green button. The voice on the other end wasn't hers, not at first. It was a nurse, calm and professional, asking if I was Raymond Ellis, father of Natalie Ellis. I froze. For a second, my mouth went dry. Yes, I said slowly, heart already kicking into overdrive. That's when the nurse told me Natalie had been admitted to the hospital in critical condition. Blood loss, complications from emergency surgery. They needed an immediate transfusion. She had a rare blood type. Mine. I didn't even think. I was already grabbing my jacket before she finished talking. The drive to the hospital was a blur of wet streets and windshield wipers smearing rain that wouldn't stop falling. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, something primal. It didn't matter what had happened between us. It didn't matter that she'd pushed me away, treated me like a renter and not a father. In that moment, all I could think about was the tiny girl who used to fall asleep on my chest, the same girl I once carried out of a thunderstorm wrapped in my coat, whispering, "Daddy's here. You're safe now." I walked through those hospital doors with no hesitation. They took my blood type on file, confirmed the match, and ushered me into the donor prep room. No one asked me why I was there. No one brought up rent or bitterness or estrangement. I was just a father, and she was just my daughter. That was enough. The process didn't take long. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the antiseptic smell thick in my nose, feeling the slow pull of blood leaving my arm and thinking how strange it was that something so vital could be given so quietly, without fanfare. I didn't cry. I didn't feel brave. I just felt tired. Not physically, but soul deep tired. This wasn't about redemption or obligation. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about love, the kind that doesn't make sense on paper, the kind that stays rooted even when the branches have been hacked down to the stump. When it was over, the nurse gave me a juice box and asked if I wanted to wait and see her. I declined. I didn't need a thank you. I didn't want a scene. What I wanted was peace, and I knew I wouldn't find it in that sterile room with monitors beeping and apologies hanging in the air like fog. Instead, I asked for a piece of paper and a pen. I wrote her a note. Just one line. Everything isn't about money. Humanity is bigger than money. That was it. No signature. No dramatic goodbye. Just the truth she didn't seem to understand. I folded it once, clean and neat, and asked the nurse to leave it by her bedside when she woke. Then I walked out of that hospital with a strange calm in my chest, like I had finally released something I'd been holding for far too long. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through someone else's life. I felt real again. I had done something that mattered, not for validation, not for approval, but because it was right. I didn't hear from her the rest of that day, or the next. I went back to work, back to Dave's basement, back to my routines. I didn't check my phone obsessively. Didn't wonder what she'd say when she saw the note. Deep down, I figured she'd either understand or she wouldn't. That was out of my hands now. And maybe, in some small way, that made it easier to breathe. I didn't do it to rebuild a bridge. I did it because that's what love looks like when all the pretty parts are stripped away. When it's inconvenient. When it's messy. When it hurts. By Thursday, the calls started coming in. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts. Her number flashed across the screen over and over. I let each one ring out. I wasn't ready, not because I hated her, but because I loved myself enough now to not walk back into something that made me feel disposable. The first voicemail was her voice, weak and raw, saying my name like it hurt to say it. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't think. Please call me. Please. I listened once, then deleted it. The second one was longer, less crying, more confusion. Why didn't you stay? Why would you just leave like that? After everything. I didn't delete that one. Not yet. I needed to remember how quickly guilt sounds like entitlement. She still didn't get it. Still thought love had a transaction attached to it. But I was done being collateral in someone else's emotional bookkeeping. I spent that weekend in silence. Not because I was punishing her. Because I was healing. Sometimes distance isn't about anger, it's about recovery. And I had a lot to recover from. In a way, donating that blood had been the most honest thing I'd done in years. It stripped away all the noise. It reminded me that I didn't need to be seen to be good, didn't need to be praised to be right. I had been a father in the truest sense of the word. And that was enough for me. The first week after the hospital felt like coming up for air after months underwater. I wasn't thriving, not yet, but I was floating again. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't gasping. I clocked in at the warehouse, did my shift, and came home to the creaky couch in Dave's basement without feeling like a burden. My meals were simple: eggs, canned beans, toast, but they were warm and quiet, and no one charged me for breathing their air. That in itself was a kind of grace. Still, even in the calm, my phone kept lighting up, more persistent with each passing day. Natalie wasn't letting go. I didn't block her. That would have been too final, too harsh, and I wasn't interested in vengeance. But I didn't answer either. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, not outside the carefully contained space of a voicemail where I could control the terms of our interaction. It's a strange thing, listening to your child beg for a second chance when you're still recovering from the sting of their first rejection. Her voicemails came in waves, some soft, some sharp, each one a new shade of regret. In one, she was crying, nearly incoherent, saying she didn't understand how she could have been so cold. I was overwhelmed, she said. I thought if I gave in, you'd never leave. I panicked. I didn't mean it like that, I swear. I listened to that one twice. Not because I believed it, but because part of me wanted to. Another voicemail came the next day, this time steadier. No tears, just a measured tone. Dad, I know you're mad. You have every right to be. But can you please just call me? Let's talk. Please. She sounded more like the daughter I used to know in that one. But I still didn't respond. Because the truth is, I didn't trust my own voice yet. I didn't want to speak from hurt or pride. I needed to speak from clarity, and I wasn't there yet. The messages didn't stop. Some days, she sent texts instead of calling. One just said, I read your note. I cried for an hour. Another said, you're right. It shouldn't have been about money. I was scared. That one pissed me off more than the rest. Scared? Of what? Me? A man who never laid a hand on her, never raised his voice unless it was cheering from the bleachers? A man who gave her his last dime more than once and never asked for it back? That's when I realized what hurt most wasn't the rejection. It was the rewrite of who I was in her mind. Somewhere along the line, I'd gone from being her rock to being her liability, her shame. That was what I couldn't forgive. Not yet, anyway. Because if you rewrite someone's character in your head, it's a short walk to treating them like a stranger. And strangers don't get couches. They get rent demands. Dave noticed I was quieter than usual that week. One night, While we sat in his backyard sipping lukewarm beers and listening to the crickets, he asked, "She still calling?" I nodded. He didn't say anything for a minute, just leaned back in his lawn chair like he was watching stars that weren't there. Then he said, "You don't owe her nothing, you know. Not even an answer." I didn't respond right away. Just let that sit with me. But he was right. I had given her blood. The literal, biblical kind of sacrifice. What more could I offer that would matter? And more importantly, what more could she take that wouldn't destroy what was left of me? The warehouse started offering longer shifts around that time, and I took every one they gave me. It wasn't just about the money, though I was saving every dime to get out of Dave's basement. It was about purpose, movement, the quiet satisfaction of sweating through honest work and collapsing into bed with muscles sore and conscience clear. I started to feel like myself again, or maybe a new version of myself, one forged in silence, humility, and a hell of a lot of lessons. There was a peace in solitude I hadn't known before. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, yes. But a man who's lost it all and learned how to rebuild? He's unstoppable. By the second Sunday after the hospital, I'd saved up enough to put a deposit down on a small apartment. Nothing special, but clean, safe, mine. When I picked up the keys, the landlord handed them to me like I was anyone else. No pity, no raised eyebrows, just a transaction. And I thanked him with a firmness that surprised even me. I stood in the middle of that empty one-bedroom for a long time, just listening to the silence. Not the kind from my truck or the lonely kind from the hospital parking lot, but a new kind. The kind of silence you get when no one owns you. The kind that feels like freedom. That night, I plugged in my old phone charger, sat on my new floor, and listened to the last voicemail Natalie had left. It was short, just one line. "Dad, please, let me fix this." I stared at the wall for a long time after that. There was no fixing this. There was only facing it. And that's what I would do when I was ready, and not a second before. Because now, I had something I hadn't had in a long time. Boundaries. And for the first time in my life, I saw them not as walls, but as doors. Ones I could choose to open or not. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she showed up. I had just come back from work, still in my uniform, boots tracking dust on the fresh floor of my new apartment. I didn't hear her car pull up, didn't get a text warning. Just a knock. 3 short raps, tentative but sharp, like she wasn't sure if she wanted me to answer. I froze with the keys still in my hand, my heart doing that strange rhythm it hadn't done since the night I signed the foreclosure papers. I hadn't seen her face since the day I drove past her apartment without stopping. And now, here she was, standing on the other side of a door I paid for with sweat and silence. I didn't open it right away. I stood still, breathing through my nose, trying to decide if this was a chapter one was ready to turn. When I finally opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered, tired, pale, thinner in the cheeks like the hospital had taken something from her that hadn't come back yet. She was holding her phone in one hand like a shield, like she needed to prove something. Her eyes welled up the moment they met mine. "Hi," she said. Just that. Not "Dad." Not "I'm sorry." Not "Can we talk?" Just hi. Like this was a casual visit, like we hadn't been walking opposite directions for months. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped aside and let her in, not because I was ready, but because I needed to know what she came to say. She walked into the apartment slow, like she was afraid to touch anything. "This is nice," she said, looking around the sparse living room. "I didn't know you moved." I nodded. "You didn't ask," I replied, and it came out colder than I meant it to. She sat down on the edge of the old armchair I'd picked up from a thrift store the week before, and I stayed standing, arms crossed, leaning against the kitchen counter. She kept her hands folded in her lap, twisting her fingers like she was trying to wring the guilt out of them. "I didn't come here to fight," she said quietly. "I came because I wanted to say thank you. And, I guess to explain." I exhaled slowly, still not trusting myself to speak. "You were right," she went on. "About the money. About everything not being a transaction. When you called, I was scared. I thought if I let you move in, I'd never be able to keep my life in order. I panicked. I wasn't thinking about how much you'd already done for me. I was thinking about how hard it is to stay afloat. And I know that sounds selfish. It was selfish, but I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her for a long time after that. Not because I was unsure of what I felt, but because I needed to make sure what I said next would be honest. You didn't just hurt me, Natalie. You made me feel like I didn't exist. Like everything I ever did for you didn't matter. You looked at me like I was just another problem to solve with money. She blinked fast, her lips trembling. I know, she whispered. And I hate that I made you feel that way. I shook my head. Hate it all you want, but you still did it. And if you hadn't ended up in that hospital, I don't know if I'd have heard from you again. That's what cuts the deepest. You only called me when you needed blood. Not love. Not help. Just blood. She broke then. Really broke. Bent forward in the chair, covering her face with both hands, her body shuddering with the kind of sobs you don't fake. For a moment, I felt that old instinct, that pull to comfort her, to wrap my arms around her and tell her everything would be okay. But I stayed still, because this wasn't a wound I could heal for her. This was one she'd carved, and now she had to sit in it. I was wrong, she said through tears. So wrong. And I don't expect you to forgive me. If you never want to talk to me again, I'll understand. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I really do. I walked over slowly and sat across from her, my hands folded just like hers were. For the first time, we looked each other in the eye, not as father and daughter, not as a provider and a dependent, but as two people who'd both lost something precious. I forgave you the day I gave you my blood, I said, my voice low but steady. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean things go back to how they were. Some things you don't get back. Trust is one of them. She nodded, still crying. I don't expect anything, she whispered. Not now. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that I love you. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that word hanging in the room like smoke. Love is a verb, I said. It's not just something you say when you're scared or sorry. It's what you do when no one's watching. What you do when someone's bleeding and you don't ask them to pay rent for it. She left not long after that. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. She thanked me again at the door, and I told her to take care of herself. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was something. A moment of honesty in a sea of silence. After she drove off, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the horizon shift from blue to amber, thinking about all the ways love shows up and all the ways it doesn't. There's a silence that comes after the storm, not the kind that's eerie or tense, but the kind that feels earned, like a quiet exhale you didn't know you'd been holding in. That's what my apartment felt like in the weeks after Natalie's visit. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. I'd come home from work, drop my keys in the little dish by the door, heat up leftovers, and sit by the window with a cup of tea like an old man. But it didn't feel pathetic. It felt peaceful. After all the months of sleeping in my truck, of feeling invisible and unwanted, this space felt sacred. It wasn't about the four walls or the furniture I'd scavenged together. It was about knowing I'd built something on my own terms. No conditions, no shame, just dignity, brick by brick. Natalie didn't call after that afternoon. I wasn't surprised. Her apology had been real. I believe that much, but real doesn't always mean ready. I think she knew that if we were going to rebuild anything, it wouldn't happen with a phone call or a bouquet of regrets. It would take time. And more than that, it would take consistency. She'd have to show up, not just in moments of crisis, but when things were quiet. And I didn't think she was there yet. That was okay. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for her to understand me. I didn't need to be needed. I had given her everything I had, twice now. Once when I raised her, and again when I showed up at that hospital without hesitation. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to earn. I had finally learned that love isn't about giving until there's nothing left of you. It's about giving what you can without setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I started doing small things to make the apartment feel more like home. I picked up a used bookshelf from a guy down the block and filled it with old paperbacks I'd kept in a box for years. I hung a few photos, one of my parents, one of a fishing trip I took when Natalie was 11, before everything got complicated. I even found an old record player at a thrift shop and started collecting vinyl again. It was strange how comforting those crackly old sounds could be. They reminded me of a time when life moved slower, when love didn't feel like a business transaction and family didn't come with invoices. One Saturday morning, I ran into Dave at the hardware store. We grabbed coffee afterward, and I thanked him again. this time with more weight in the words. You didn't just give me a couch, I told him. You gave me space to remember who I was. He shrugged like it was nothing, but his eyes softened. Just passing the kindness forward, man, he said. But I knew it was more than that. People like Dave are rare. The kind who don't keep score, who don't see your failure as contagious. He reminded me that not all connections are broken. Not all people walk away when the chips are down. And that reminder stayed with me, long after the coffee went cold. Every so often, I'd replay snippets of Natalie's voicemails, not to punish myself, but to remember, to stay honest about what had happened. It's easy, when time passes, to soften the edges, to romanticize the pain. But I didn't want to forget how it felt to be on the other side of that phone call, to hear your own child reduce your worth to a dollar amount. That wound hadn't scarred over yet, and maybe it never fully would. But I wasn't holding it like a weapon anymore. It had become something else. More like a lesson carved into the stone of my life, one I could pass down, even if just in silence. I don't know what the future holds for Natalie and me. Maybe there will be another conversation. Maybe she'll show up again, this time not asking for forgiveness, but just to sit across from me and talk like two people trying to rebuild a bridge without pretending it was never burned. Or maybe she won't. Maybe our relationship will always carry that fracture, that fault line that never fully mends. But either way, I'll be okay, because I've finally learned to stand on solid ground, not the shaky foundation of hoping someone will finally see your worth. I see it now, and that's enough. I spent one evening writing a letter I never planned to send. I wrote it for me, more than for her. In it, I said everything I'd never get to say out loud in the right moment. That I loved her still, that I always would. But that love isn't unconditional when it's one-sided. That I wasn't mad anymore, but I was changed. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the back of my journal where no one else would find it. Because some words aren't meant to be delivered. They're meant to be acknowledged, accepted, and let go. And as for me, I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. The warehouse job turned into a full-time position with benefits, and I've started mentoring one of the younger guys on night shift who reminds me a little of myself back in the day. I've got a rhythm now, a quiet kind of joy. I don't have a lot, but everything I do have, I earned with my own two hands. There's a pride in that no one can take from me. Not foreclosure, not rejection, not even blood ties. Because sometimes, the people you'd bleed for wouldn't even offer you a seat at their table. That's when you build your own house and lock the damn door. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you love just to protect your peace, you're not alone. Raymond's story is a reminder that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. And sometimes, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If this story hit home for you, take a moment to like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about real people, real pain, and the strength it takes to stand tall after the fall. See you soon in the next one.